Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
Welcome back, everybody, and I just have to say we are proud to announce our first partnership with a great company, Aunt Susie's Granola, AuntSusiesGranola.com. If you love granola, then you're going to love Aunt Susie's Granola. Aunt Susie's is a 100% gluten-free kitchen. They've expanded their product offerings to include overnight oats and other kind of snacks. My favorite flavors are salted caramel and s'mores, so try those out. Aunt Susie's Granola is shipped coast to coast online with subscription service options. The owner, Erica, has generously offered our listeners a great deal. From now until July 31st, listeners of our little podcast can use the code GenX Classic Sports, all one word, GenX Classic Sports, for a 20% discount, one per customer. That's GenX Classic Sports, one word, for a 20% discount through July 31st at Aunt Susie's Granola, A-U-N-T, Susie's Granola. Welcome back, everybody, to the show. We're about to jump back into part 2 of our Hoosiers Classic GenX movie, sports movie special. And I just want to remind everybody from where we left off on part 1, Coach Dale is about to be voted on by the town, by the school, whoever. They're all in one room, basically, and they're about to decide whether Coach Dale is going to remain the head coach or whether they're going to fire him on the spot. So thank you for listening. If you like what we do here, please press like. Please subscribe, and we thank you for listening, and on with part 2. Barbara Hershey, who plays Myra Fleener, by now there is just a hint of a romance brewing between her and Coach Dale. And I mean a hint. They really don't spend much time on that relationship, trying to put it ahead of the story at hand with the sports. But you can tell he likes her, even though she's been all but completely dismissive of this guy all along. It's like she's finding every way possible to get him run off. And sure enough, she confronts him one day with a newspaper article that she's found. And this newspaper article explains that Coach Dale was a college coach, and Coach Dale punched one of his own players. Well, I don't even know if it said one of his own players. I assume it was one of his own players. But he punched a college player, and he got suspended from college basketball for doing that. You know, in the 50s, being how news was back then, it's not unthinkable that a guy could go across the country somewhere and coach at the high school level, and no one would be any wiser of the situation. But basically, he was suspended from coaching high school in whatever state that event happened in, and I don't think they even say. And she basically tells him, when we have this meeting, I'm going to let everybody know that this happens. So cut to the meeting. Everybody's in the church. The good people of the town decide to have a vote. And she decides to speak, and she gets up there with the newspaper article, and for whatever reason, she decides not to read it. She begs him to give him a second chance instead. So that's kind of the glimmer of perhaps she's interested in him and is willing to give him a chance. And they vote to kick him out anyway. Now, this is why that's the most pivotal scene in the movie, is because, I guess unknown to anybody, Jimmy Chitwood's standing in the back of the church, and Jimmy, on behalf of the coach, he goes up to the front and he tells everybody it's about time for him to play ball. And, of course, they all erupt in cheering. And I think that they believe Jimmy means, now that you've kicked the coach out of here, I'm ready to play. But no, Jimmy tells them, if coach stays, I'll play. But if you continue with this kicking him out thing, I won't play. So that stuns everybody. It stuns everybody. And so there you go. You've got your star player back. You're up to 7 players. And you have a pretty good helper on the bench now. So things start clicking. And then, of course, in the history, in the tradition of sports movies, we get to enjoy the montage of Jimmy out there shooting and balls going through the net. and Shooter cheering from the bench, and all kinds of good stuff is now happening because they're clicking. And, Shooter does his thing from the bench and helps them out. So despite everything going well, the favorite subplot for me being the Shooter thing is, sure enough, Shooter has a relapse. He shows up or he doesn't show up for a game at all to sit the bench, and they can't figure out where he is, and he shows up drunk. And he embarrasses himself. He embarrasses Everett, his son. He embarrasses Coach Dale. He embarrasses everybody. He shows up in the middle of the game, walks out onto the court, incoherently babbling at the referees over a call. And, it's not good. And so he ends up, Coach Dale takes him to the hospital and checks him in for basically what passes as rehab in the 1950s, which was, it appears they just kind of strapped him to a bed and made him ride it out. So there are scenes of conversations between Shooter and his son. There's scenes of conversation between Shooter and Coach Dale. But one thing you get out of it is that Shooter's trying to do his best, and Shooter's trying to make this one work. And so the redemption story of Shooter is kind of complete at this point, because his son goes and wishes him well and so forth. And all of this is happening, of course, right when they're ready to go to the postseason and qualify for state. Of course, then you have to cut to the obligatory sports montage again, where they fight their way through the sectionals and the regionals and on to state. But, one of the things that everybody, I think, likes about this movie is the scene when they show up for the state tournament in basically Butler Fieldhouse is what they used to call it on the campus of Butler in Indianapolis. And Coach Dale, in one of the great scenes in all of sports movies, Coach Dale has them measure the rim to see how far it is from the floor. And, it's 10 feet just like it is in their home gym. So he points out to them that nothing's changed. It's just going to be a big crowd and more athletic team, but you still have to do what you have to do. So they play in the movie, they play against the South Bend Central Bears, which have more height, more players, more of everything. And you all, if you've seen it, you know that it boils down to the last shot of the game. And, Coach Dale did that thing that coaches do sometimes, and he outthinks himself. Coach Dale draws up a play where Jimmy is the actual decoy, and a kid named Merle is going to take the last shot. And everybody in the huddle just sort of, the whole tone changes, and Coach reads the room basically and says, "What's going on?" And Jimmy says, "I'm going to make it, or I'll make it." And Coach is like, "Yeah, what was I thinking? I'm an idiot." And he redesigns a play for Jimmy to take the last shot. And if you know your sports movies, you know that, of course, Jimmy sinks the last shot. They beat a team that, by what we would call today's standards, that's a 2A team or 1A team beating a 7A team. And so those Hickory guys win the state title as a small school. Along the way, there's a scene where Coach tells Myra Fleener he'd really like to take her out on a date, and she definitely warms up to him, and she and her mom show up at the games, and the whole town supports them and everything. And, it's a great feel-good story, and that kind of leads me into some of the thematic things that happen throughout, and I just want to touch on some of besides the plot. And I said I wouldn't mention every scene in the movie, and I didn't. I just mentioned the key ones. But there's some thematic themes. There's some key themes happening in this movie. First of all, it's a sports movie, so it has to be an underdog story. Everybody, all the way back to the Bible, loves a David versus Goliath story, right? And so this one's no different. You have one of the smallest towns the smallest town in the state tournament defeating one of the biggest schools in the state tournament. So of course everybody likes that kind of story. And then the redemption thing that I've already mentioned, I love the fact that it's not an outward thing, but Coach Dale needs his own kind of redemption. He's a more mature person than the guy who slugged a kid in the face and got suspended. He's had time in the military. He's aged. He's got his second chance, even though it's in this small town Indiana high school. He needs his own redemption, and somehow through giving Shooter a second chance, perhaps he's making up for some of the things that he's done to himself along the way. And that was always my favorite subplot, and it always will be. I just love the fact that he helped Shooter out. And anyone else acting in that role probably could have been, I don't know, carrying it a little too far with the way they did things. But I thought Dennis Hopper playing Shooter was great. It's just, he just, and of course, knowing Dennis Hopper's history, he certainly had his own experience with drugs and alcohol. So maybe it was an informed choice in how he acted. But it was a really good performance. Obviously, he got nominated for it. And then there's another theme in this whole story, and it's about community and it's about tradition and things like that, where the town's always enjoyed success doing things a certain way, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but they're hesitant to change. And I think that happens in sports, and it happens in all kinds of areas of life. And so, they needed a change. They were sort of successful before, but Coach Dale brought something else to the table. And then as far as themes and sports and so forth, early on, Coach Dale makes a big deal out of this being a team effort, playing team defense, playing team offense. And yes, Jimmy Chitwood joins the team, and yes, that allows him to get better. But yes, his individual talent helped him a lot. But until then, without those guys doing what they did collectively, there wouldn't have been a chance to take it as far as they did, even with Jimmy. Jimmy was the talent that put him over the top, but he certainly wasn't playing anymore with four guys that were standing around and watching. Each one of those guys, there's two or three guys in different scenes. Even the kid that had been the manager had a scene where he hits 2 free throws to win a game for him. 2 other players had chances to hit free throws and shots to win games from them or for them. And so it wasn't just a team of guys standing around watching a superstar play. So I think that's important to know that their discipline that they endured beyond wanting to endure it, the discipline that they endured as a team sort of led to all of this, and that's important. So yeah, it's a sports movie, so the team you want to win did. That's not always the case, and so I kind of like the fact that it looks old school. Like I always like movies set in the 50s because especially sports movies, because they give me a glimpse into what kind of childhood my dad and people his age had. So I always loved that. So there's some interesting cinematography with the way they shoot the gyms. And if you've never seen some of those gyms, like I'm old enough to remember a few gyms in Arkansas and South Arkansas where they were very similar to the gym that the Hickory team plays their home games in. And I mean, I think it's bandbox they used to call them, where it's a stage on one end and there's an out of bounds line, and the wall is very, very close to that. And there's a lot of scenery like that I really enjoyed in the movie. Great sports movie. Great acting. So let's talk about the people that brought this movie to the public. The cast: Gene Hackman, of course, who just passed away. He was the winner of 2 Academy Awards in his career. In 1971, he won the Oscar for Best Actor in The French Connection. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's Gene Hackman with a snub-nosed revolver chasing bad guys around New York City. He won for that. And then he won Best Supporting Actor in 1992 for Clint Eastwood's Western Unforgiven, where he played the sheriff in there. So he was also famous for his roles in Bonnie and Clyde, Mississippi Burning. And for kids my age, when people my age were little, we remember him as the one and only Lex Luthor in the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And then there's just a long list of other things we've all seen him in: The Poseidon Adventure, The Conversation, A Bridge Too Far, Crimson Tide, The Birdcage, Absolute Power, Enemy of the Estate, The Royal Tenenbaums, and Runaway Jury, among many, many others. He's one of the best to ever do it. Rest in peace, Gene Hackman. Barbara Hershey, who plays Myra Fleener, and like I said, they had just a glimpse of a romance in this movie. But you kind of go away with the feeling that, okay, maybe he's finally going to get to take her to the movies, as he asked her about. Barbara Hershey was an Emmy award winner and a Golden Globe award winner, and she's known for a movie called Beaches in 1988 that some of you may be familiar with. Dennis Hopper was, like I said earlier, he was nominated for an Oscar for playing Shooter in this movie. Dennis Hopper goes back a long ways. He goes back to the early 50s. And Dennis Hopper played in Rebel Without a Cause with the great James Dean. He was also in Giant with James Dean also. He was in Gunfight at the OK Corral. He was in The Sons of Katie Elder, Cool Hand Luke, Hang 'em High, and True Grit, among others. But a lot of people know him as the writer and director of a movie called Easy Rider. And so Dennis Hopper was around for a long time, writing, directing, and acting in movies. So great performance for him. And then let me talk a little bit about the guy who played the principal, Cletus Summers, the high school principal who suffers the heart attack. Sheb Wooley. So here's the connection to my hometown. Sheb Wooley was a country singer, and his claim to fame is that he sang novelty songs. And so to explain that in modern terms, he was kind of the Weird Al Yankovic of country music back in the 60s or 70s or whatever, going back a long ways. And he was famous for a song in 1958 called The Purple People Eater, which was a novelty song. If any of you have ever heard the lyrics, one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater, that was Sheb Wooley. And so Sheb Wooley had a dual career. He was known for touring the country as part of country and western back then, singing novelty songs, and for being an actor. And Sheb Wooley started out in his acting career by being in a movie that you've all heard of called High Noon. Very, very famous western. And he was in The Outlaw Josie Wells, and he was in Rawhide. In '86, he ends up in Hoosiers. But here's the big claim to fame for Sheb Wooley, really, is in the 60s and 70s, he became a guest on Hee Haw, and he actually wrote the theme song for Hee Haw. So there you go. There's your Sheb Wooley trivia. And if you've ever heard of a guy named Ben Colder, Colder, as a country singer, that's actually him, same guy. And I think Ben Colder is the name he used to record the song Purple People Eater. Okay, now what's that have to do with my hometown? Sheb Wooley, apparently, someone from my hometown will have to tell me, but I'm almost positive I'm remembering this correctly, that in the late 70s or early 80s, somewhere in there, Sheb Wooley toured around and went to different little towns and stuff singing. And he performed at our high school. And I don't know who sponsored it, what fundraiser it was for, or whatever, but Sheb Wooley made an appearance. I didn't go that I remember, but yeah, I'm almost positive I'm remembering that correctly. So who brought this movie to the screen? Well, actually, before we go to that, let me tell you who. I told you earlier that there's a guy the character named George was played by an actor that you've seen before. And George was the parent type who was actually coaching the team and wanted to run things his way. George was played by an actor named Chelsea Ross. And Chelsea Ross also played he played Coach Dan Devine in Rudy. And he also played a baseball pitcher in the movie Major League. If some of you remember Major League with Charlie Sheen and Joe Boo and Corbin Burnson and all those people, he's the guy who was already gray-headed by then and was like the knuckleball pitcher who always walked around with the greasy stuff on his shoulder, trying to get his shoulder to loosen up because he was already a senior citizen, basically, by baseball standards. That's Chelsea Ross, and he plays George in this movie, and he plays Coach Devine in Rudy. And why am I mentioning Rudy? Well, that brings me to my next group of people who actually brought this to the big screen. The director of Hoosiers was a man named David Anspaugh, and the writer for Hoosiers was a man named Angelo Pizzo. Well, they were high school. No, they were college friends at Indiana University. And as buddies, they got out there in the world and decided to try to give showbiz a try by writing and directing movies. And they made a successful movie out of Hoosiers, and that gave them a little bit of clout. And with that clout, they had a movie named Rudy that they put out in the early '90s. So they as a team are responsible for Hoosiers, and they're responsible for Rudy. And they actually one or two of them, one or the other of them, actually participated in some other sports movies, and I don't think I really recognize those. So I'm not going to mention them, but you can look it up. Now, the thing about Hoosiers is that not only did it actually make a little money for them, on a $6 million budget, I think it made $28 million. And that's pretty good return on your investment. And that, $6 million isn't much to invest in a movie. Now, as far as production goes, where'd they film this? They did film this in Indiana. And they actually filmed it in the town that hosted the gym from Hoosiers was a town called Knightstown. And it still has what they call the Hoosier gym in town there. The little green walled, small little gym with the stage and all that. That's in Knightstown, Indiana. The town of New Richmond, Indiana, served as the downtown area and the community of Hickory. So a couple of different towns, one town for the area, one town for the gym itself. Now, maybe the best piece of trivia to this, to me, that it just kind of makes me smile, is that they tried to film this in Indianapolis and they weren't getting a whole lot of response. They filmed the finals in Butler Fieldhouse, which is where they played the finals in Butler Fieldhouse historically in Indianapolis. So they were going to shoot it in the same building, and they were advertising all over the state of Indiana looking for extras. They needed crowd scenes. Like you have to have people in the crowds cheering for these movies. Well, they couldn't find anybody, or at least the numbers of people that they needed to shoot this movie. So they did something really brilliant, I thought, and I just love this. So they in 1985, when they were ready to shoot this, they actually offered to let any two high schools willing to do this play in front of their camera crews in Butler Fieldhouse. They said, if we can find two schools that will do this, we will put the cameras out, but your crowd has to show up. We need everybody to dress 50s style. We're going to film the crowd as they watch an actual high school game. Okay. So that was brilliant. They filled the place up. And here's what's great about it. One of the high schools that participated was the hometown team of Jimmy Chitwood. The guy who played Jimmy Chitwood's real name was Maris Valanis, and his high school team volunteered to come be one of the participants so they could film these crowd scenes. So Jimmy Chitwood himself, his hometown shows up. And so what the producers did, they came out, they brought the crowds were out there in period costumes from the 50s. And at halftime and immediately following the game, the actors from Hickory and South Bend High School, they put them out on the court while the crowd was there before the game or at halftime of the game to film the scenery they needed for the championship game. And then they put them back out there after the game. So they used that one crowd for an actual game, and the same people doubled for them for an actual the scenes that they needed for the state finals. So I thought that was really cool. And Jimmy Chitwood's own fans from back home came to help out, and I thought that was a really neat touch to that. You would think maybe people just weren't interested in putting on 50s garb and showing up, but if you got, it's Indiana, so two high schools, if you offer to let them play in a big house with a big crowd and have some Hollywood there, I guess that's an offer that a couple of schools couldn't refuse. So, yeah, so New Richmond, Indiana has served as the fictional town of Hickory, and Knightstown, Indiana served as the fictional Hoosier gym. So there you go. That's pretty much it on the story, the movie itself. But as far as I don't know if any of you care about movie critics. There's only one that I've ever really liked, and he's deceased now, and his name was Roger Ebert from Siskel and Ebert. And he's the one who wore glasses. And Ebert loved this movie, and he had a really nice write-up about it back in the day. But one of the things that you need to know is that this doesn't happen to a whole lot of movies. But in 2001, Hoosiers was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, and that's done by the Library of Congress. And what that means, according to their own language, is that means this film is culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So, in other words, it's a great slice of Americana, and it's now preserved forever in the Library of Congress, as it should be, in my opinion. So, we all love sports movies, and this channel that I'm doing, we're going to seasonally cover a Gen X sports movie, and there'll be different sports involved. And we told you back at Christmas we would continue to do that, and here we are. Now we've got our basketball movie done, and we're going to continue with this, and we'll have golf, and we'll have baseball, and we'll have hockey. And then next year we'll turn around and do it all over again with football and start from there. So I do believe that there were some really great movies about sports made in the 80s. We will cover those. So I apologize it was just me. It's really hard to get guys together right now, and you just had to sit through this with me. But hey, I'll be back with more exciting guests. We've got some guys on the hook for interviews and discussions later. But I do appreciate you listening, and if you don't mind, press that like button, make a comment, subscribe, whatever you can do to help us out, and I would greatly appreciate it. And that is our discussion of the 1986 basketball classic Hoosiers, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.